In the last video, we got the onboard UI set up. Now let's actually use it. So go to our location map view, because the first thing we're going to need is a Boolean, that says like is showing onboard screen, right? So we'll do that in the actual view model, not the map view. So above alert item, and the reason I'm doing it above alert item is if I do it like below region, the spacing is all messed up because region is such a crazy variable. So I'm gonna do it up here at published var is showing onboard view. And that is going to equal false by default. Actually, for right now, for test purposes, let's make it true. That way we can actually see the onboarding screen. Okay, back to the location map view. Now we want to add something called a sheet. So we'll do that above the alert, dot sheet, and is presented. So that is bound to a Boolean, which we just created. So $ for the binding, view model dot is showing onboard view. So what this means is when is showing onboard view is true, show the sheet. When it's false, dismiss it. And the content we want to show there is our onboard view. Now, well, you can delete this parentheses and then delete this content label just for cleanliness. So now we're showing our onboard view. However, in our onboard view, right, we want to be able to dismiss this view when they hit the X button. We're going to talk about why we even added this X button in a second, but they can of course swipe down the view or they can tap the X to dismiss. So that's where this button action comes in. We need to set that is showing onboard Boolean to false, right, when we dismiss it. Well, we're going to need access to that, right? So we're going to need a binding to is showing onboard view, and that is a Boolean. So we're going to pass that into our onboard view when we create it. And then that way here we can do is showing onboard view equals false when they hit the X button, and then that will dismiss. So now we're going to get an error because when we're initializing our onboard view back in our location map view, we don't have the binding to is showing onboard view. So that will be $view model that is showing onboard view. So now that is us passing the binding to our onboard view. So when we flip it, it will dismiss the screen here. Do Command B, see if we forgot something somewhere else. Missing argument parameter. Oh, in our preview. Previews always get me. So is showing onboard view. In order to do bindings in your preview, do .constant and then pass in a value. We'll say true. It doesn't matter. Hit Command B. That should fix all of our errors. All of our problems are solved. Okay, back to location map view. That's the view model. Location map view. So again, what's going to happen is on launch, we'll in our view model, right? We have this set to true. So we should see, if we test it, we should see our modal slide up. So back to location map view, right? That's that sheet. View model is showing onboard equals true. So it is going to show the sheet. And then when we dismiss it with the X button, or when you slide it down, it automatically flips it to false. That's something Swift UI handles for you. But let's see what happens here when we run this. Okay, so we got the slide up modal, but our location is popping up. That's not the behavior we want. So the behavior we want is if we haven't seen the onboard, then show that modal. If we have seen the onboard, don't show the modal and then check for location services, which is what triggers all of that. So let's hit allow once. That way this will pop up again. But here's our UI, right? I think it looks good. It looks fine. You see you can slide the card down. What I think needs tweaked is our little circle X button. To me, that's too cramped in the corner. I don't know, right? I feel like it needs more space. So we'll add a little padding around that. But overall, you see you can swipe down to dismiss it, or you can tap the X button and that dismisses it. So the behavior we want is the first time somebody launches the app, they see, actually, let me run through this again to actually show you. So yeah, okay, pretend that didn't pop up. So I'm gonna hit allow once. So we want them to see this at first, and then when they dismiss this, whether they slide it down or they hit the X button, that's when we want the location to pop up if we don't have permission. Of course, if we have permission, nothing's going to happen. But that's the order of events we want to have happen. So if I hit stop here, on the sheet is presented, there's also a parameter called onDismiss, which you can do something when the modal is dismissed, which is exactly what we want. And what we want to do is view model, check if location services is enabled. So Command C and then Command V. And then you'll see we're going to adjust this later in the video. So we're not doing this twice. But for now, that's what we want. And in here, we actually don't need these parentheses. So there we go. Command B, make sure everything's all good. Cool. Okay, so we're not going to test that because it's going to check for this twice. We're still going to see the same thing. We're not going to see the proper behavior until we account for this. And we're not accounting for this until we persist whether we've seen this or not. And that's where user defaults comes in. But before we implement that, let's talk about our UI real quick. So again, we wanted to tweak the onboard view, right? We wanted to add some padding around, we'll just put it on the button here, dot padding, hit the preview or hit the canvas. Okay, you can see that let it breathe a little bit. That gave it some space. You can tweak the numbers if you don't like the way that looks. I think it's fine. But real quick, let's talk about why we even have this X button. Because let's be honest, it's a much cleaner UI just to have the swipe down, right? Everybody knows the swipe down modals. However, if you read the human interface guidelines, anytime you present a modal, you should always include some sort of button to dismiss it rather than just the swipe down. And this is for accessibility reasons for things such as screen readers. I'll link to the page in the human interface guidelines all about modals. You can check that out. So yes, that is why we put that button on there and didn't just have the clean UI of swiping down. Okay, back to our location map view. Now we can talk about user defaults and persisting whether we've seen this or not. Okay, so in our view model, that's where we're gonna handle all this. If you're not familiar with user defaults, I'll give a quick 30-second explanation. It's on-device persistence that is meant for very small bits of data that aren't very important. Maybe important is the wrong word, but it's not, security, it's not private because, you can easily hack into user defaults. So you want to make sure it is small bits of information that are not, super private or super sensitive data. An example I read in a blog post once was that someone had their is premium unlocked Boolean. So you could unlock the premium version of their app in user defaults. And then a lot of people just ended up being able to go into user defaults, flip that to true, and then now they have the premium version of their app for free. So you don't want to store anything like that or passwords or private information in there. For something like, has this user seen the onboard view and it's just a Boolean, user defaults is perfect for that. And that's what we're going to use. But real quick, the reason we didn't use app storage, which was new in iOS 14, which is SwiftUI's property wrapper to access user defaults, is app storage also acts like a state variable to where anytime it changes, it's going to invalidate the UI and trigger a redraw. And that caused problems with how we wanted to use it. So I did try to use it because don't get me wrong, a brand new property wrapper for SwiftUI and iOS 14. Yeah, I'm trying to teach that kind of stuff. However, it just didn't work for what we wanted to do. So that is why I fell back to just using user defaults on the view model, kind of old school UI kit style. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do under our device location manager, let's create another variable called has seen onboard view. And that is going to be a Boolean, and it is a computed property. So we want to return, here's the user defaults, right? User defaults dot standard and then dot bool for key. So user defaults is essentially a key value pair, similar to how we're using CloudKit. So essentially what we're saying is give me the value at this key and it's a Boolean. So the key, we can create the key, right? So that is also going to be has seen onboard view. Just like CloudKit, this is a string. We're going to use this more than once. So let's safety first. We'll do let k has seen onboard view equal, and then we'll cut and paste this string here. That way when we reuse it, we don't have any spelling errors, and we can do k has seen onboard view. You'll see we're going to reuse it again in a second. Now, if we haven't set anything initially, right? Because yeah, we're asking for give me the value at has seen onboard view, but you may be thinking we've never set a value. What happens if there's no value there? Well, the way the Boolean works on user defaults is if there's no value there, it defaults to returning false. So essentially what's going to happen is the very first time they launch their app and we've never set anything in this user defaults, it's going to return false because nothing is there, which is what we want because that means they haven't seen the onboard view if we've never said anything. So now let's check for this. Well, let's clean up this parentheses real quick. And we're going to create a function that is going to run at the start. And I'll be honest, I struggled with this naming. I'm not a fan. Naming is very hard. You'll know if you've programmed for a while, naming can be difficult. So I am open to suggestions and feedback in the comments. That might be a good discussion, but here's what I did, right? I called it func run startup checks, and you'll see, because we're going to do a couple things in here. And let me walk through those steps. So essentially what this function is going to do is it is going to see if the user has ever seen the onboard screen. If that is false, then, hey, show the onboard screen, keep it moving. If it is true, they have seen the onboard screen, then we want to check for location services, right? We want to run it as normal. So this is what I call running startup check. So let's type that out. So if not has seen onboard view, which again is our variable that we just created here, which reaches into user defaults and pulls out the value. So if that is false, then I want to show the onboard screen. So that is showing onboard view equals true, But however, after I do that, I want to set user defaults value to true. So now when we try to pull it from user defaults, it's going to be true and we're not going to show the onboard screen. So to do that, user defaults.standard.set, you see, and you set value for key. There's all kinds, right? But you see there's set value for an int, a float, a double, bool. We want the bool. So we want to set true. And what key do we want to set true? Well, that's the key we have up here, right? The K has seen onboard view. So like I said, if has seen onboard view is false, go ahead, show the onboard view, and then in the user defaults, which persist, set it to true, and we should never show it to them again. Caveat, never say never. There's two ways we could have possibly handled this, right? One possible way would be to put a property on the user up in CloudKit and read that property. That way that always persists. Well, that means you got to do a network call every time. I don't feel like that's efficient. By putting it in user defaults, you're saving it there and persisting it. However, the small downside, in my opinion, is if they delete the app, anytime someone deletes your app, they clear out user defaults. So in the event somebody deletes dub-dub-grub and then reinstalls it, they're going to see the onboard pop up again. I think that's a fine price to pay to not make a network call to check, if we put this up on the user. So again, that's kind of talking about the trade-offs you have to think about on the best way to handle things. Okay, so now if the user has seen onboard view, right, if this evaluates to true, so else, then we want to run check if location services is enabled. So now what we want to do back on our map view is instead of just checking for that, we want to do view model run startup checks. And again, I'm iffy on the name. Let me know your opinion on that. But what happens here on appear, we do view model, run startup checks. In our view model, that happens. First, we're going to check to see if we've seen the onboard view. If we haven't seen it, show the onboard view and move on. If we have seen it, then check for location services is enabled like we do every time we come to the screen. And then to make sure our flow is working right, because we're not checking for location services, right? If we show the onboard screen, however, if we go back to our location map view, remember we added the on dismiss, right? So if we show the onboarding screen, when we dismiss it, now we're checking if location service is enabled. So now when we run the app, what we should see, fingers crossed, right? I haven't tested this. We just built it. I've tested it previously, but this particular implementation, what we should see is the onboard screen pop up, but no location services. And then once we dismiss it, we should see the location permission pop up. Okay. And then we're going to stop it and run it again. And then we shouldn't see the onboard screen, but we should see location services because we're only going to hit allow once. Okay. So fingers crossed. Let's see what happens. Okay, yep, there is the onboard screen. We didn't see location services. Cool, it's here. Now I could dismiss it by swiping down. Let's dismiss it by hitting the X. On dismiss fires. Now we check for location services. There we go. Hit allow once. Okay, cool. So in theory, our user defaults has true now. We've seen the onboard screen. So let's stop this. Run it again. We should skip the onboard screen this time, but still see the location permissions because we hit allow once. Okay, of course, things can't work the first try. What did we do wrong there? Hit stop, go back to the view model. Oh, I know what we did. Haha, I know. So we did set it to true. We're good. That's what I thought I might have messed up. However, if you notice, we're defaulting is showing onboard view to true. Remember when we did that just in the beginning, just to make it pop up? Got to be careful when you do that stuff, because if you forget to change it, that will always be true. Well, we want this to always be false unless, when we grab the value, it returns true. Okay, so now when I run it, we should skip the onboard screen, but we should see the location profile. Again, leaving the mistakes in because this is how development goes. This is what happens. There we go. No onboard screen, but we see the location pop up. And now if I hit always allow while using the app, not always. So now when I stop it and run it, I shouldn't see either. I shouldn't see the onboard screen. I shouldn't see location permission. We should be like a regular user of the app. Just get in there, good to go. There we go. So that wraps it up for the onboard screen, right? We built the UI, we determined when we wanted to show it, and we persisted, when we've seen it and when we haven't. In the next couple of videos, we're going to move on to our actual profile and start building all that and getting that working.